What's up everybody, this is Tuba Solo coming at you with my 5 tips for beginning hikers and backpackers. This channel is all about backpacking and hiking in Southern California and beyond. If that interests you, consider clicking the subscribe button. Make sure that you also click the bell for notifications. That way you never miss a video. Now, let's get on with my 5 tips for beginning hikers and backpackers. Tip number 1, get your cadence down. So I want to tell you guys a quick story about having the proper cadence when you walk. I want to say I was maybe a couple years into hiking, and I'm sure as like many new hikers, I had no idea what it meant to have a proper cadence when walking. Really, what I was trying to do was trying to get up the hill as fast as humanly possible, like as if I was in some kind of a race, not really realizing that it was actually having an adverse effect on me and my hiking ability. And the interesting story about that is that when I finally realized that a cadence was very important is when I was at Ice House Canyon. And this is not an easy hike when you're trying to get to the different peaks that are around there. Even getting to the saddle is not necessarily the easiest hike in the world. And I remember that I was going up the trail and I was doing my usual, just walking as fast as I possibly could, not realizing that I was stopping about every 2 minutes to catch my breath again. But I remember seeing an older gentleman coming up the trail, and I got all prideful and arrogant and thought to myself, you know what, I'm not going to let this old guy beat me up the trail. And here I am, going up the trail like I was doing. And every single time I would stop, I noticed that this older gentleman was getting closer to me. And, it kept happening. I kept, blasting off ahead of him, and he just kept this constant pace. And eventually he overtook me, and then I watched him go past me and go up the trail and pretty much disappear into the trail, and here I was still stuck huffing and puffing down lower in the trail. Now, why do I tell you that story? Because that day I actually learned something. I finally realized for the first time ever how important it is to have a cadence, to make sure that your walking is within your realm of ability. I know that a lot of new hikers probably want to just blast out the gate and get to the top of any mountain, but really the best way to get up to any mountain and be successful, the best way to finish any trail and be successful is to figure out a cadence that doesn't allow your heart rate to get too high up. And once I finally realized that, my goodness, everything changed for me when it came to hiking and backpacking. Honestly, today I don't believe that there's any mountain that I couldn't climb, knowing now that I have my proper cadence. Now, my cadence is not necessarily as fast as somebody else's cadence, and my cadence to other people or newer hikers may seem like it's way too fast for them. But the important thing is that you figure out the cadence that works for you. One of the things that was most instrumental to me was the stride that I was taking. I realized that the steps that I was taking were far too far apart, and ultimately what it was doing, it was causing me to get too tired too quickly. So that was one of the things that I changed right off the bat that made the biggest difference. My stride got a lot shorter. Now, I wasn't taking baby steps, but I was definitely not taking these long gaping strides as I was walking, and that made all the difference. I was able to figure out my cadence, and now pretty much it doesn't really seem to matter what's on my back, the weight, as long as I can keep a proper cadence and keep moving, I'm positive that I'll be able to climb any sort of mountain that's out there. Tip number 2. Practice sitting on the ground. I know it sounds crazy, but this is actually very important for the outdoors, and I had no idea that the outdoors you did so much sitting down on the ground. Now, a lot of times there's logs and rocks that you could sit on, but there's a lot of times where there really isn't an appropriate seat. Now, for those of you that don't realize, that are brand new hikers and backpackers, and I certainly didn't realize this my first few hikes, there's no recliners out there. There's no easy chair. Everything is utterly uncomfortable, and rarely have I found a rock that was absolutely perfect or some kind of a tree stump or something that was absolutely perfect to sit on. So one of the things that you need to start doing is actually practice sitting down. And I know it sounds almost crazy, but sitting down on the ground, you don't think it's a big deal, but especially if you're getting older, sitting down on the ground and sitting cross-legged is not something that necessarily everybody can do and necessarily has the flexibility to do. Now, I'm not necessarily 60 years old or something like that, but I ain't exactly 19 anymore either. And I've actually noticed myself that sitting down sometimes can be a struggle. I don't have the flexibility that I used to have when I was younger. And I literally have to practice sitting down on the carpet, sitting in a cross-legged position. I have to do my stretches. I have to be able to get up and down. And that was something that for me as a brand new hiker and backpacker, I had no clue was a big deal. But you need to practice sitting down on the ground. It's terribly uncomfortable, but the more you do it, the more your body gets acclimated to it. And then before you know it, you're actually going to be able to sit down pretty much anywhere without any sort of worry. And even though you're dead tired, you'll be able to actually sit down. You'll have the flexibility appropriate to be able to sit down and get up and do all that. Another thing too, if you're a tent camper, it's incredible. I don't know why I didn't think about this before I had gone out. But just getting in and out of a tent, me being a bigger dude, it's not exactly the easiest thing in the world for me either. But it's just funny how sitting down on the ground in my tent, when I was first beginning to start backpacking and doing overnights and what have you, I was really quite shocked at how terrible I was at sitting down on the ground. But yeah, that's something very important. If you're going to start backpacking, even if you're going to start hiking, you need to practice sitting down on the ground from time to time and get that flexibility and get that ability to go up and down, because as you rest and as you stop, you may end up sitting on the ground and you don't even realize it, but that happens more often than not. Tip number 3, realize that there's an East Coast and a West Coast. So what do I mean by that there's an East Coast and a West Coast? Well, yeah, of course, there's an East Coast and a West Coast, but the thing that I'm trying to get at with this is that when I was first hiking and backpacking, I was looking at a lot of videos online and doing a lot of research. By nature, I like to do a lot of research. I like to learn about the hobbies that I have. And needless to say, YouTube is a wonderful place to gather up all sorts of knowledge about hiking and backpacking, and especially hiking and backpacking gear. Well, the problem is that a lot of times I was watching gear videos from guys that were on the East Coast. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the East Coast, but the East Coast trails, the amount of rain that they get, even the type of soil that they have to deal with doesn't necessarily match what I was going to be experiencing in Southern California. And I didn't have the wherewithal to realize that maybe what I'm watching right now is not necessarily specific to Southern California. So the one thing that I'm trying to get at with this, realizing that there's an East Coast and a West Coast, as you're researching, as you're doing, looking at different products to purchase, looking at the type of tent that you want, you need to filter it through that lens and realize, what I'm watching right now, is this actually appropriate for the places that I'm going to be hiking and backpacking from time to time? Now, all of us take special trips. All of us have the ability to go and do stuff from time to time. But the reality is those special trips are few and far between, and many times we're in our own backyard and we have to consider what is in my backyard when I go backpacking and hiking. Is what I'm watching right now on YouTube appropriate for the type of terrain that I'm going to be running into? One of the perfect examples of this is a ball of twine that I carry, not twine, but rather cord. I have this ball of cord that I utilize for the purposes of staking with rocks. Now, did I ever think when I first was looking at tents that I would have to stake with rocks? No, I just assumed that the soil was completely perfect over here in Southern California, just like I saw in all sorts of videos. Sometimes even the videos that I do in my own backyard, the soil is perfect in my backyard, you know? But the reality is when I get out there in the actual field, the soil is actually very loose and it doesn't work very well. And tents that require a lot of tension, for example, DCF tents, those tents require a lot of tension, and when you don't have soil that plays nice with you, the tension gets all out of whack out of these tents, and then they don't pitch as nice as they could, or as nice as a sill nylon tent would pitch, which is vastly more forgiving than a DCF shelter when it comes to tension. But those were things that I never understood back then, and I carry this ball of twine with me, this ball of cord, so that if I end up running into a place where the soil does not like to play nice with me, I can go ahead and stake with rocks and make sure that my tent is tensioned out properly. Another example of that is tent stakes. I would love to use the titanium shepherd's hook stakes every single time I go, but the reality is that not all soil plays nice with those stakes. And I'm finding out that things like MSR groundhogs, the big boys, the full-size MSR groundhogs are really kind of the stakes that I need for my particular area. Now, do I want to carry lighter stakes? Do I want to do things that make the load on my back a lot easier? Of course I want to. Who doesn't? But again, filtering through the lens of there is an East Coast and there is a West Coast, I need to consider, is my gear choice appropriate for what I'm going to be facing? Tip number 4, start to pay attention how water affects you under physical exertion. Now, what am I getting at with that? One of the things that I used to do when I was first hiking and backpacking is that I used to drink just gallons of water. But little did I realize that the water that I was drinking was actually causing me to lose electrolytes. Now, am I saying that you shouldn't be drinking water on the trail? No, absolutely not. But you have to realize that the amount of water that you intake, coupled with the amount of physical exertion that you're doing, is going to have some kind of a result. And many times that result is sweat. And as you sweat, as you start releasing some of that salt out of you, you're starting to lose electrolytes. So you need to be able to prepare in advance and understand how water affects you. One of the biggest manifestations of how water affected me was typically when I was doing my old, the way that I would drink water back when I first started. A lot of times when I would do an overnight, I would find out in the middle of the night, all of a sudden I would start getting leg cramps. That's a very clear example that you're missing some electrolytes in your body. You're missing some salt in your body. So one of the things that I started to notice as time progressed, and I started not drinking as much water, rather just drinking the amount of water that I knew was appropriate for me, that I would stop getting leg cramps and I would stop having problems. If you look at some of my old videos, you can see that the shirts that I was wearing, you could see the salt marks in them. This was something that could have easily been that I was drinking too much water and my body's trying to release all this water that I'm bringing in because it can't process it under physical exertion. And another thing to remember too, especially if you're in a place where you hike and it actually gets very warm, one of the things that you want to remember is that you need to be able to prepare to replace electrolytes. So if you know you're going to go to a place where you're going to be sweating a lot, you need to be able to prepare and not just drink water, but also drink electrolytes in with you. So that may result in using Nun tablets, that may result in using powdered Gatorade, and you mix your own Gatorade on the trail. But you need to be able to understand how water works with your body under physical exertion. And the more you start to pay attention to that, and the more you start to find out what the balance is for you, the better result you're going to get at the end of the day after a long day of hiking and backpacking. Tip number 5, a little peace of mind won't break you. I'm going to go ahead and tell you another story, actually. This is back a while back. A bunch of us got together and we decided to go to San Gorgonio National Forest. That's a local forest in my area. We decided to go to Dry Lake. And Dry Lake is at a very high altitude and can result in very inhospitable weather. And we were heading in towards winter. And needless to say, the nights were getting very cold. Even the day was very cold. When we showed up in the parking lot that day, I mean, it was insanely cold. We got out of the car and I just remember the cold hitting me so hard. And immediately I started, thinking to myself, man, do I have the right gear? Did I bring everything that I needed? Am I going to be able to get through this night unscathed? And I remember that Jason Huckaba, a buddy of mine who I backpacked with, he offered me his Costco quilt. And I remember debating and, should I take this thing or not? I mean, man, I'm already, I already got some jackets, I already got some extra layers and what have you, but I still feel like it's going to be exceptionally cold tonight. Should I bring this extra piece of gear? And Matt Dunn, who I also backpacked with, he said something that has stuck to me to this day. He said, man, is it really going to break you to carry that? Is it really going to break you to carry that extra thing? That way you have some peace of mind that you're going to be okay and you have another layer. And I'm not saying that you should just take everything, and go nuts with your backpack. But the reality is taking that Costco quilt really wasn't going to break me. And here I'm having this discussion in my mind, trying to decide between having peace of mind and trying to be lighter, when the reality was that I could have easily carried that extra piece of gear and had the peace of mind. So as you're beginning to hike and backpack and you kind of look at your gear choices, you should certainly do as much research as you can on ultralight concepts and what have you, but understand too that sometimes when you're first starting out and you're still dialing in things, or if you have some kind of anxiety about a weather situation, You want to do what you need to do to be as safe as possible. And the reality is taking a little bit extra gear is not going to break you. And as you start to get better at hiking and backpacking, as you start dialing in your system, you could start shedding some of these things. But I just remembered that he had said that, and it absolutely stuck with me, and I think it was so important. And that's something you got to really remember. Is this extra bit of gear, not a ton of gear, but this extra bit of gear really gonna break me? Well, I hope you've enjoyed my 5 tips for new hikers and backpackers. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd go ahead and hit the like button. Again, if you're interested in hiking and backpacking in Southern California and beyond, consider subscribing and make sure you hit that bell for notifications. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video, and we'll see you next time.